Hi, I'm Evelyn Thorne, 43, and I spent 20 years restoring antique photographs for museums and private collectors. Each image once revived memories of bygone eras, until the night at River Birch Farm changed everything. I discovered a chilling secret hidden along the edges of century-old family portraits, a secret my grandmother left behind in that decrepit house. Now, every photograph haunts me with whispers of unspeakable horrors, and I can't bear to look at a single image without feeling the weight of that fateful night. I still remember the day I first stepped onto River Birch Farm. I had been sent to restore a collection of family portraits recently donated by a local estate. As I carefully cleaned and mended the fragile prints, I noticed something odd along the edges, a faint, almost imperceptible smudge that looked like a handprint, or maybe something else entirely. My heart pounded as I leaned in closer. It wasn't just dirt. There was a pattern, a message hidden within the border of these century-old photographs. That moment sparked a deep, unshakable dread I'd never felt before. I left the farm that day with more questions than answers, a nagging sensation that something unspeakable lurked just beyond what the eyes could see. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the image from my mind. Every time I looked at a restored photograph, that mysterious mark haunted me. I started comparing images from different families, and shockingly, the same strange detail appeared again and again. It was as if someone or something had deliberately tampered with these portraits, leaving a signature of horror hidden in plain sight. I began to wonder if my grandmother's mysterious past and the secrets she kept in that old house were somehow linked to this recurring nightmare. The discovery unsettled me deeply, urging me to uncover the truth behind these silent whispers. Unable to rest, I pored over every scrap of documentation I could find, hoping to decipher a clue. I called old family friends, visited local archives, and even spoke to the few elderly residents who remembered the old days. All I found were hushed rumors of a dark legacy tied to the farm and the family that once lived there. I knew then that my life would be forever changed by what I had seen, and that the journey into this mystery had only just begun. I couldn't get the unsettling detail out of my head. Every evening after a long day of work at the studio, I'd sit by my desk and scrutinize each restored photograph. The faint smudges along the edges seemed to shift under the flicker of my desk lamp. I began to suspect that these weren't random blemishes but deliberate marks, warnings or messages from beyond. My hands trembled as I traced the outlines with my fingertip, trying to make sense of the eerie patterns. The closer I looked, the more convinced I became that the photographs were hiding a secret. Late one night, driven by a mix of dread and curiosity, I reached out to a friend who worked at a local museum. I told him about the strange marks I'd found and asked if he'd ever seen anything similar in other antique images. His reaction was immediate, a hushed tone and a long pause before he confessed that there were old legends in our town about whispers on the frame, mysterious signs that foretold dire events. According to the stories, these marks were believed to be the residue of a curse, left behind by vengeful spirits who sought to communicate a long-forgotten wrong. That conversation left me both terrified and determined. I began documenting every detail of the photographs, meticulously recording the size, shape, and placement of each mark. I even experimented with different lighting and angles, trying to reveal hidden clues. The more I investigated, the more I felt as though the images were speaking directly to me, urging me to remember what had been suppressed for generations. In that lonely night, as I labored over one particular portrait, a cold shiver ran down my spine. The whisper of a long-dead secret was beginning to awaken. Haunted by the mystery in the photographs, I decided it was time to dig into my own family's history. I recalled the many cryptic stories my grandmother had told me about River Birch Farm, a place shrouded in sorrow and secrets. One rainy afternoon, I drove back to the old family house, now abandoned and cloaked in neglect. The air was thick with decay and memories, and every creak of the floorboards seemed to echo the voices of the past. I spent hours rummaging through dusty trunks and faded letters, desperate to piece together the puzzle my childhood had left me. Among the brittle papers, I discovered a diary belonging to my grandmother. Her neat, hurried script chronicled a life full of hardship, betrayal, and mysterious events that had occurred on that very farm. One entry in particular sent a chill down my spine. It described a family portrait that held a secret, a hidden mark on its edge that foretold doom. According to her words, the mark was a sign of a terrible legacy, one that had plagued the family for generations. I felt a deep connection to her pain and a growing urgency to understand the full truth behind her warnings. Every detail in the diary made me question everything I thought I knew about my heritage. Had I unwittingly become a part of this cursed legacy? The realization was both horrifying and compelling. I couldn't help but feel that the mark on the photographs was not a random accident, but the key to unlocking a dark chapter of my family's past, one that had been hidden away in the silence of River Birch Farm. With trembling hands and a racing heart, I vowed that I would uncover every secret, no matter how disturbing it might be. Determined to face the source of my torment, I returned to River Birch Farm under the cloak of darkness. That night, the farm was shrouded in an eerie stillness, the only sounds the rustling of dead leaves and the distant cry of a night bird. As I walked along the creaking wooden fence, memories of my first visit surged back, filling me with both dread and a strange sense of destiny. The old farmhouse loomed before me, a decaying relic of a bygone era, its windows like dark, empty eyes watching my every move. Inside, the silence was absolute, broken only by the echo of my footsteps on the creaking floorboards. I made my way to the room where the family portraits had once hung proudly. The walls were bare now, but in the dim light of my flashlight, I could almost see the outlines of those long-forgotten images. I set up my camera and began to take my own photos, hoping to capture any detail I might have missed before. With each click, my anxiety grew. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, as though the house itself was waiting for me to uncover its secrets. Then, in a moment of chilling clarity, I saw it, a faint, shifting shadow at the very edge of one of the frames. I froze, heart pounding, as I watched the shadow pulse and twist as if alive. In that instant, a wave of terror washed over me, and I knew that the horror hidden within these portraits was far more sinister than I had ever imagined. I fled the room, the echo of that shifting shadow forever etched into my mind, a reminder that some secrets should never be disturbed. In the weeks that followed, the experience at River Birch Farm began to unravel my once steady life. Every time I looked at a restored photograph, I saw more than just an image. I saw the ghostly residue of that night, the haunting shadow that refused to fade away. Sleep became a stranger. Nightmares filled with disjointed images of shifting faces and whispered secrets plagued my every moment. I found myself avoiding my work, too terrified to touch a single photograph, fearing that I might once again unlock the door to that cursed legacy. My days turned into a blur of anxiety and isolation. Friends and colleagues noticed the change in me, the way I flinched at the sound of a creaking door or a sudden shadow. I began to question my sanity, wondering if the horror I had witnessed was a product of my own fractured mind. But deep down, I knew that what I had seen was real, a true, palpable darkness that had invaded my life and refused to let go. I started to scribble notes frantically, documenting every chilling detail, desperate to make sense of the relentless terror. The boundary between my waking life and the nightmare realm blurred with each passing day. I could hear soft whispers in the silence of my apartment and catch fleeting glimpses of that same shifting shadow in mirrors. The more I tried to ignore it, the stronger the presence became. It was as if the very essence of River Birch Farm had followed me home, embedding itself into my soul. I was trapped in a relentless descent into darkness, a slow, suffocating embrace that threatened to consume me entirely. One stormy night, with rain hammering against the window and thunder rattling the walls of my apartment, I decided that I had to confront the terror once and for all. I gathered all the evidence I had meticulously documented over these agonizing weeks and drove back to River Birch Farm. The drive was a blur of emotion and determination, my mind fixated on the one goal, to find the source of the whispers that haunted me. Arriving at the farm, I felt a mixture of dread and resolve. It was time to face the past head-on. Inside the dilapidated farmhouse, every shadow seemed to pulse with a malevolent life. I retraced my steps to the room of portraits, my flashlight barely piercing the darkness. There, amidst the silence, I discovered one final detail, a faded inscription etched along the frame of a long-forgotten portrait, a message that confirmed my worst fears. It spoke of a legacy of betrayal and an unending cycle of vengeance, a curse passed down through generations, a secret that my grandmother had carried all her life. The realization was shattering. The horror wasn't just in the photographs, but in the very blood that ran through my veins. In that final, harrowing moment, as I stared into the void of history and pain, I felt a cold, insidious whisper brush against my ear, an echo of all the lost souls and unspoken truths. I left the farmhouse with a heart heavy with sorrow and terror, knowing that the darkness I had uncovered would forever linger in my soul. The final whisper of that cursed legacy now haunted me, a chilling reminder that some secrets, once revealed, can never be forgotten. Hey, I'm Marcus Bennett, 36, a forensic accountant in Boston. My days used to be filled with numbers and endless spreadsheets, predictable and safe. But 3 months ago, something happened that shattered everything I thought I knew about reality. Now, as I sit in my cramped apartment amid the hum of city traffic and flickering streetlights, I can barely bring myself to remember what truly went down. That day, an inexplicable event plunged me into a nightmare far beyond mere numbers. It all started on a routine Tuesday. I was buried in a mountain of financial records for a big corporate audit when I stumbled upon something completely off. In a series of spreadsheets, amidst rows of mundane figures, I noticed an anomaly, a set of numbers that didn't add up, almost as if they formed a pattern. At first I thought it was a simple error, but the more I scrutinized the data, the more it seemed deliberate, like a hidden message. My heart pounded as I realized that these figures weren't random. They hinted at something beyond ordinary accounting. I could swear the numbers almost spelled out words when I rearranged them. That inexplicable chill crawled up my spine, and for the first time, I felt that there was something sinister lurking beneath the surface of my everyday work. By the end of that long day, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the anomaly was more than just a mistake. I spent hours double-checking every column, every decimal, convinced that the numbers were trying to tell me a secret. The office, usually a quiet haven of routine, felt eerily charged, and as I left that evening, the city's familiar glow seemed dimmer, as if warning me of the darkness to come. I drove home with a heavy mind, the data replaying in my head like a broken record, each number a ghostly echo of something unspeakable. That night, in my lonely apartment, I couldn't sleep. The mysterious figures danced in my dreams, blending with the familiar hum of the Boston streets outside. I kept wondering if I had discovered a code or a sign pointing to a hidden past, a past where numbers were not just numbers, but a ledger of dark secrets waiting to be unraveled. I knew then that my life was about to change forever, and deep inside, I braced myself for what was to come. Over the following days, the anomaly began to haunt me relentlessly. Every new set of figures I audited seemed tainted by that mysterious pattern. It wasn't long before I started noticing strange occurrences outside of work too. In the quiet hours of the night, as I worked late in my small office, I began to catch fleeting glimpses of a shadowy figure in the reflection of my computer screen. At first I dismissed it as fatigue, but the sightings became too regular and too vivid to ignore. I'd hear soft whispers echoing in the empty corridors of my building, as if someone, or something, was trying to communicate through the silence. My colleagues joked that I was letting the numbers get to my head, but I knew there was more. Late one evening, I received a cryptic voicemail on my cell phone. The message was barely audible, a series of indistinct murmurs interlaced with static, yet I could make out fragments like "revenge" and "the ledger." My hands trembled as I replayed it, wondering if it was connected to the bizarre data. The feeling that I was being watched grew stronger, and even during my daily commute along the busy streets of Boston, I couldn't shake the sensation of unseen eyes tracking my every move. The more I tried to rationalize the strange events, the more they defied logic. The numbers, the whispers, the inexplicable presence, it all seemed interwoven into a tapestry of dread that was creeping into my everyday life. I started keeping a journal, jotting down every odd occurrence in hopes of finding a pattern. Yet every entry only deepened my unease. It became clear that what I had encountered was no simple error. It was as if an ancient, vengeful force had seeped into the very fabric of my existence, using numbers as its medium to send a message that I was now compelled to decipher. Unable to live in constant uncertainty, I decided to dig deeper. I began cross-referencing the anomalous entries with old case files and corporate histories. What I found was chilling. The numbers corresponded to financial records tied to a decades-old scandal involving embezzlement, betrayal, and untold losses. It was as if the past was reaching out to me, demanding that its story be told. I visited local archives, spoke with retired investigators, and even sought out a historian specializing in corporate fraud. Each conversation painted a picture of a long-forgotten tragedy, a story of greed and revenge that had been buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and silence. Late nights turned into a blur of research sessions fueled by coffee and sheer determination. I discovered that the company in question had been responsible for significant financial ruin in a small community years ago. The victims of that scandal had never been fully compensated, and whispers of a curse had begun to circulate among the affected families. I started to suspect that the anomaly in my spreadsheets was not a mere coincidence, but a deliberate act of retribution from beyond the grave. It felt as though the unresolved injustices of the past were using my mundane work as a gateway to demand justice, even if it came at the cost of my peace of mind. My investigation soon revealed connections between the old scandal and several influential figures whose reputations remained untarnished despite the dark history. As I pieced together the evidence, I felt increasingly isolated, as if the very act of uncovering the truth was painting a target on my back. Yet, I pressed on, driven by the desperate need to understand what force had turned ordinary numbers into a harbinger of terror. With every document I uncovered, I became more convinced that my discovery was just the beginning of something far more sinister. Determined to confront the origins of this nightmare, I set out to trace the financial trail back to its roots. I arranged meetings with former employees of the now-defunct corporation and visited the abandoned offices where the scandal had once erupted. Each location was a time capsule, filled with dusty files, empty cubicles, and an overwhelming sense of loss. One particularly eerie afternoon, I found myself in a derelict office building on the outskirts of Boston. The silence there was palpable, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the occasional creak of old furniture. Inside, among the remnants of once bustling workstations, I discovered a file that had been carefully hidden away. It contained detailed records of fraudulent transactions and personal notes that hinted at a deep-seated vendetta. The handwriting was frantic, the words smeared by what looked like tears, or perhaps sweat. As I read through the documents, I began to piece together a narrative of betrayal. A group of executives had manipulated the system to enrich themselves at the expense of the community, leaving behind a trail of ruined lives and broken promises. It was a legacy of greed and cruelty that had festered for decades, and now, it seemed, it was coming back to haunt us all. The more I delved into the past, the more I felt the weight of the secrets pressing down on me. It wasn't long before I started receiving anonymous warnings. Cryptic emails and unsettling notes slipped under my office door, urging me to stop digging. But there was no turning back. The truth was calling out to me, a siren song of retribution that I could not ignore. With every new piece of evidence, I sensed that the numbers were no longer just figures on a page. They had become a ledger of the past's dark deeds, and I was now the unwilling keeper of its secrets. As the investigation reached its crescendo, my life began to unravel in unexpected ways. Strange occurrences plagued my every move. Unexplainable power outages in my apartment, mysterious shadows flitting past my peripheral vision on rainy Boston nights, and the persistent feeling that I was never truly alone. The anonymous messages grew more menacing, and I started to fear for my safety. Despite the terror, I was driven by an obsession to uncover the final truth hidden within those cursed numbers. I knew that if I could decode the complete message, it might explain the eerie phenomena and perhaps even bring closure to a century-old injustice. One fateful evening, after another sleepless night filled with disturbing dreams, I decided to confront the unknown. I returned to the derelict office building where I had first discovered the hidden file. With my heart pounding, I meticulously retraced my steps and re-examined every document. In the dim glow of a single desk lamp, I uncovered one final, chilling detail, a reference to a date and location that seemed to correlate with the original scandal. It was as if the past was reaching out to me, urging me to complete the cycle of retribution. I felt a mixture of dread and determination, knowing that I was on the verge of a breakthrough that could either exorcise the darkness or plunge me deeper into it. In that tense, silent moment, the realization struck me. The anomaly in my spreadsheets was not just a random glitch. It was a deliberate message from the ghosts of the past, a ledger of horrors waiting to be balanced with the scales of justice. I resolved then and there that I would follow this final lead, no matter the personal cost. The veil between the living and the dead, the rational and the supernatural, was lifting. and I was about to step into a realm where numbers told stories of blood, betrayal, and unending vengeance. On a stormy night that matched the turmoil in my soul, I set out to confront the truth head-on. Armed with all the evidence I had painstakingly gathered, I followed the final lead to an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Boston. A place that seemed frozen in time, echoing with the regrets of a bygone era. The building's crumbling walls and shattered windows bore witness to decades of neglect, and as I stepped inside, the oppressive atmosphere nearly suffocated me. Every creak of the floorboards and distant rumble of thunder felt like a prelude to an inevitable confrontation. In the depths of that forsaken structure, I finally came face to face with the culmination of my investigation. There, among scattered documents and remnants of past transgressions, I discovered a hidden room. It was filled with ledgers, photographs, and personal items that tied the old scandal to powerful figures who had evaded justice for years. The Kyber room exuded a sinister energy, as if the very walls were whispering the names of the betrayed. As I sifted through the dusty files, I felt a presence, a cold, unyielding force that seemed to watch my every move. In that moment, I realized that the darkness I had unearthed was far more personal than I had ever imagined. The final revelation was as devastating as it was terrifying. The numbers, the whispered warnings, and the ghostly anomalies were all part of a vengeful reckoning that had been set in motion long ago. It wasn't just a case of corporate fraud or a relic of past injustice. It was a curse, a malevolent force seeking to balance the scales with brutal precision. With shaking hands and a heart full of sorrow and determination, I knew that I could never return to the life I once knew. The ledger of shadows had been opened, and its dark secrets would haunt me forever. Hi, I'm Sarah Chen, 28, and I work as a wildlife photographer for National Geographic. I've spent my life chasing the beauty of nature in remote corners of the earth, until a trip to my uncle's abandoned cattle ranch in Montana last winter turned everything upside down. Amid frozen fields and eerie silence, I saw things, fleeting shapes and unsettling whispers at the edge of every photograph. Even now, months later, every time I peer through my camera's viewfinder, I catch a glimpse of them, making me question what is real. I had always loved adventure, but nothing prepared me for the isolation of that Montana ranch. After receiving a call from my uncle about a forgotten property in a remote area, I decided to document its wild, decaying beauty. Driving through endless stretches of barren highways and snow-covered plains, I felt both excitement and a strange apprehension. The vast silence of the landscape, punctuated only by the crunch of tires on frozen gravel, set the tone for what was to come. I arrived at the ranch at dusk, its dilapidated barns and sagging fences outlined against a blood-orange sky that hinted at stories long buried. Stepping off the truck, I immediately sensed an unsettling energy. The ranch, once bustling with cattle and life, now lay abandoned, its empty structures exuding decay and neglect. I set up my gear near an old wooden porch and began taking test shots. The cold air bit at my cheeks as I scanned the surroundings with my camera. Every shadow, every gust of wind felt loaded with meaning, as if the ranch itself was trying to speak. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone, even in this vast emptiness. That first night, as I reviewed my images under the dim light of my portable lamp, I noticed something odd. In the background of several photos, faint silhouettes flickered at the edges, shapes that vanished when I adjusted my focus. The experience left me uneasy and eager to dig deeper into the ranch's mysterious past, a past I would soon discover was intertwined with my own reality. The following day, I spent hours wandering the property, letting the biting wind and endless snow guide my steps. With each step, the ranch revealed more of its eerie character. I photographed frost-covered barns, rusted farm equipment, and trails where fresh snow had quickly been disturbed. But it was the subtle play of shadows that truly unnerved me. In many of my shots, there were hints of figures or shapes that didn't belong, a fleeting glance of a face or a hand, barely visible at the periphery. At midday, while resting in the old barn, I took a break to review my images on my camera. The same vague outlines caught my attention again. I began to wonder if these anomalies were simply tricks of the light, or if they hinted at something far more sinister. The local legend, as I later learned from a few elderly ranch hands, spoke of phantoms of the past that haunted abandoned places like these. Though I tried to remain rational, a chill ran down my spine at the thought that I might be witnessing something paranormal. By dusk, as the temperature dropped and the ranch was swallowed by a heavy silence, I felt increasingly vulnerable. Every creak of the old wooden boards and every gust of wind sounded like a whisper from a forgotten era. That night, I barely slept, haunted by the persistent feeling that the shadows I'd captured were trying to tell me something dreadful, a secret that refused to remain buried in the snow. As the days turned into a blur of restless nights and uneasy exploration, the strange occurrences intensified. I started noticing that the anomalies in my photos were not random. They seemed to follow a pattern. While reviewing a series of shots, taken early in the morning, I caught a glimpse of what looked like a pale figure in a doorway, only to find the space empty when I approached. I even felt sudden cold drafts and heard faint murmurs when I was alone in the vast empty fields. My rational mind struggled to keep up with the mounting evidence of something inexplicable. One evening, after a long day of shooting in the fading light, I returned to the barn where I had first seen the strange shapes. Setting up my camera on a tripod, I decided to capture a time-lapse of the empty interior. As hours passed, the images slowly revealed more details, subtle, shifting movements at the very edge of the frame that defied explanation. My hands trembled as I reviewed the footage, certain that I was witnessing an unseen presence lurking in the background, silently observing me. The more I tried to rationalize these events, the more they unsettled me. What if these weren't just tricks of light and shadow? What if the ranch was haunted by echoes of its tragic past? The idea was both terrifying and compelling, pushing me to dig deeper and confront the possibility that I was in the midst of a supernatural mystery that could upend everything I believed about reality. Determined to uncover the truth, I began researching the history of the ranch. Late one night, I pored over old county records and newspaper clippings at a small local library in a nearby town. I discovered that the property had once belonged to a family involved in a series of inexplicable disappearances and tragic events during the early 1900s. Whispers of betrayal, lost love, and a curse that seemed to haunt the land permeated the old documents. It appeared that the ranch had been abandoned under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind a legacy of sorrow and unresolved vengeance. Armed with this knowledge, I revisited the ranch with renewed determination. I interviewed a few locals, elderly, neighbors and former workers, who recalled eerie stories about strange figures seen wandering the property at night. Their tales were filled with a mixture of fear and resignation, as if they had long accepted that the ranch was a place where the veil between this world and something darker was incredibly thin. Every story, every snippet of information painted a picture of a tragic past that continued to echo in the present. As I compiled these revelations, the atmosphere around me grew thicker, charged with a sense of impending doom. The ranch was no longer just an abandoned relic. It was a repository of pain and unanswered questions. I began to suspect that the phantoms I had seen were not mere illusions, but manifestations of that unresolved grief and anger, a spectral echo of a legacy that demanded to be acknowledged. The burden of these secrets weighed heavily on me, intensifying the fear that I might be forever changed by what I was uncovering. The more I delved into the past, the more the ranch's sinister influence seeped into my daily life. I found that, even after leaving the property, I couldn't escape its grasp. Every time I looked through my camera's viewfinder, I still saw fleeting images of ghostly figures and distorted faces lurking in the background. Sleep became elusive as nightmares of the ranch, its empty corridors, the sound of creaking wood, and that chilling, persistent whisper plagued my nights. I began to document every unusual occurrence in a journal, noting the exact time, location, and what I saw. The entries grew longer and more frantic as I tried to make sense of the recurring apparitions. At work, colleagues noticed my distracted demeanor and the haunted look in my eyes. They joked that the ghosts of Montana were following me back to the city. But deep down, I knew something far more unsettling was at play. As weeks passed, the boundary between my waking hours and the nightmares blurred. I could almost feel cold hands brushing against my skin when I was alone, and every unexplained noise became a trigger for anxiety. The images from the ranch were burned into my mind, a constant reminder that the past was not dead. It was alive, seeking to reclaim what was lost. I felt increasingly isolated, caught between the rational world of numbers and the irrational terror of the supernatural. In a final bid to reclaim my life and understand the mystery, I decided to confront the haunting once and for all. One stormy night, with rain lashing against the window and thunder echoing over the barren plains, I returned to the ranch. Determined and trembling, I set up my camera in the very spot where I had first seen the ghostly figures. I spent hours taking long exposure shots, hoping to capture clear evidence of the supernatural presence that had tormented me. As I reviewed the images later that night, one photograph stood out, a nearly perfect, chilling capture of a pale figure, standing in the distance, its eyes seemingly locked onto mine. The realization hit me hard. These weren't random apparitions. They were echoes of a tragic history, a ghostly reminder of the ranch's tortured past that had now entwined with my own life. The spectral figure in the photo was as real as the fear pulsing through my veins, a final message from the beyond, urging me to acknowledge the darkness that lay hidden in plain sight. With that haunting image etched forever in my memory, I left the ranch, unsure if I had truly captured the truth or merely the reflection of my own terror. But one thing was certain: every time I look through my camera's viewfinder now, I see more than just wildlife and landscapes. I see the lingering ghosts of Montana, forever haunting my every step, reminding me that some secrets, once revealed, never truly fade away. Thank you very much for watching today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to stay informed when the next video comes out. And tell me, what did you think of today's stories? See you in the next video.